So I wanted to do a video on how I compartmentalize my EQ process, and I want to show you how I start every single one of my sessions. And this has been tried and true for me through trial and error and through working with people who have sent me their mixes, through my own demos, through working with my old bands and such. I do corrective EQing on any percussive element. In this case, it would be drums, before I do any other tracking, before I dial in any other tones or anything in that nature. There are multiple reasons why I do this. First and foremost, it's just nice to have, whether you're mixing or about to track or dial in the tone, to have a cleaned up drum sound so you can really gauge what's going on frequency wise when you're running your tones through the mix. And I should preface too, although this is in isolation, what we'll do in here, relative to the rest of the process, I do everything else through the mix. I'm not a big isolation guy. It takes a while to train, but it's worth it in the end. With that being said, this is great for if you're a beginner because you can appraise just how careful you need to be in isolation, but you should be able to hear these changes. On the other hand, too, if you are more advanced, this can set you up for things like bus compression and limiting. So with that being said, I'm just going to play a raw groove here. Admittedly, I am rendering dozens, if not hundreds, of stems in multi-tracks from my other computer to a drive. So I don't have all my files right now, but I figured since I just got this template going, it'd be fine just to show you a MIDI groove here. I'm going to play this and it's routed out properly. As for my levels, if you're going in with real drums, you know how it is. You really got to get it the way you need, going in as perfect as possible. But these samples sound great on their own, especially once you get a raw balance going. So that's up to taste, though. I'm not going to tell you how to run your levels. There are so many videos about that, and routing is just going to have to be up to you as well. As you see, I did a little bit on the faders over here. I decided my kick and my toms were a little too hot. Anyways, now that we have that sorted out, I'll go ahead and play this groove. So that was completely raw, and now I'm going to play for you my corrective EQ'd iteration. At this point, I'm going to disable everything again and just jump into the raw samples with the balance I have here. But I hope you noticed that it just got so much tighter and just was way less harsh than the raw sound. The raw sound does sound great. These are great samples, and the GGD libraries are awesome. But if you want to achieve a specific frequency balance like I do, you need to do this. So we have everything leveled. We have everything panned according to the overheads. And what I'll usually do is I'll start with the room and the kick. And the reason I do that is because the room I like to use for a lot of energy, and I like to really run a lot of room with all the aspects of my kits. That creates a lot of low end and low mid conflict. So what I'll do is actually run the kick, snare, and toms. For now, I'll just show you the kick against the rooms and then explain why I have this high pass where I have it. So I know that sounded like a lot of low end was removed from the rooms, and generally if I were just to isolate the rooms, I would roll it just forward enough that I'm rejecting the subs. But just for this specific sound and this groove, it's more aggressive. I wanted the kick to be more isolated and pushed forward. And if you do want more of that natural boomy room sound with a lot of bloom in the low end, I don't recommend absolutely neutering your low end like this. I just did it here specifically because I found a good balance to where I was still hearing the close room mic and a little bit of the far room, but it wasn't impeding on the kick attack. And I feel like a lot of the times too, people go to their close mics and try to compress it or EQ it in a way that will get it to shine beyond the room instead of just saying, well, all it took was a subtle EQ move here of a high pass filter, 12 dB per octave, moved up to get the same effect. And I've also now made a lot of room in my mix for other things. There's also just so much less low end. So when I'm going for that aggressive mid range in my room, which I like, and trying to maintain the highs here, if I want to compress this region, there's not going to be a bunch of loose stuff down here that I don't necessarily want to hear impeding on that. I'll explain the low pass in a bit. Regarding the snare in this situation, I can solo it as well. You won't hear too much of a difference, and admittedly, I think when I push this forward, I pushed it a little too far forward because the snare does lose a little bit of body, so that's something to be aware of. But we'll go raw, and then you can hear the snare once I engage that. It doesn't really push the snare farther forward. It kind of just pushes the mid-range of the snare forward. I know I have about a dB here in the mid region, but that's just to add some aggressiveness to the room sound. I also took a little bit of this out. I don't recommend doing either of these moves right now. I just know my personal mixes and my tones that I have preset, and I'm able to judge through my presets and templates here that I can get away with these moves. I say, when in doubt, nothing more than subtle high passing and low passing. So here's the snare. So I actually don't like how I've removed a little bit too much low mid with this high pass. So I'm going to pull the kick back in and then move this back just to draw a line of best fit. Because in this phase, we're not looking to get crazy or be perfect. We're just looking to generally clean up the kit. And it's better to have a little bit extra loose low end than to totally have it removed. And then, once you have that compressor activated, according to that low end, which you've allowed to be reintroduced, well, if it's not there in the first place, and then you adjust that, now that's hitting your compressor down the line, whether it's on your bus or your full mix, and it's changing everything. So like I said, I've addressed those other bands. Don't even worry about those. That's just a me thing. And I'll touch on this low pass then. So as you've probably caught wind of, I don't really like doing isolation at all. Even when we're just running through single aspects of the kits, I try to reference any overlapping frequencies that I'll see across the way. When it comes to cymbals, I think you can trust your ears a lot more because we're so perceptive to 2K through 5K, which is this region over here, that it's pretty clear as to what needs tamed. Regarding this low mid cover up over here, it's the exact same process that I did with the rooms, except it's going to be on your overheads. And I'd say, once again, general rule of thumb is make sure you can capture that stereo effect and the cool sound of the overheads, but just make sure it's not impeding with your snare or kick. So now once you appraise your high end and just play your overheads and run either a wide band or identify a set of frequencies that just don't sound too great. And in this phase, don't start notching stuff out. Just be very broad and very careful in this phase. If you hear something blatantly horrible that it won't matter what's running through, you're going to hear that through the mix, get rid of it. I'm talking like a blatant or something like that. I hope my de-esser caught that so I didn't just blow out your eardrums. But try and be broad here. Dial over here this high mid up to treble frequency range to your taste, to your ears, to your cymbals. Some will be harsher than others. I'll show you what's going on here. This is more of a hearing damage protection thing too for when you go to mix. That's one benefit of it. Those right around 4K sounds horrible. As for this, I'll solo this so you can hear just how far I'm taking it up. It depends on your cymbals, but regarding your super highs, we want to segment that off around 15 or 16. I went 14 here, but just something to keep in mind. It's super subtle, but it really helps. And then on top of it, it's the same concept with the room there, but we're going to use this now as our reference. So when I play this, when I reintroduce the room, you don't want the room to start impeding now on the cymbal bus or whatever is designated as your overhead and cymbals. You want the rooms to, of course, supplement that and still have that high mid and treble energy to an extent, but you want this to be responsible for your high end. And so the low pass here is going to be considerably lower. And once again, it's a little extreme on my end, but for example's sake, I want it to be pretty clear what's going on here. So this is the super, super high range. And that was pretty obvious. I don't know if you could hear it, but if you need to know what to look for when you're listening to that high of a range, grab something where you can solo your bands on your EQ, or grab a high shelf and pull it up to about 10K plus so you're not hearing too much of that very apparent treble range, and then just boost it up here at really high so you can really hear what's going on. That's my recommendation. Now, regarding the close mics, I'll basically appraise my kick low end based on my monitors, and I'll turn my volume up for that. This is to just get rid of any extra thunder. There's going to be a lot of low mids in your kick in general and lows that will make it harder to hear the low range or sub range that you want. So I'll play this. So it just helps tighten up that low end. And now, like I said, that we have our high end established over here, we're going to leave these on for the rest of our moves. These are just going to continuously play. I'll run my kick up on the high end, that silky, sandy, spritzy frequency range. It's starting as low as 5K, but what you're really hearing is the top end of this shelf. We want to almost match that right below the cymbals. So it sounds about fine right there. And the same thing with the snare. Now the kick didn't need any sort of low pass, but the snare bottom seemed to really impede with where I had it set in terms of its high frequencies. So same concept as the rooms, just make sure there's nothing overlapping with what you've established to be the high-end boundaries. So once you have that aligned with the cymbals, once again with these, I think you can be a little more liberal in your use of bands on the snare and just find any specific really jarring frequencies that come out in your snare top and bottom. In this case, there were some bad nodes. And right here's the fundamental tone. I'll play that real quick for you. And the exact same thing with the toms. Just make sure your subs on your toms and any residual frequencies that ring out are filtered out. You can use a gate if you want, and I've seen people use transient designers. In the corrective stage, as long as you're being really safe and just making sure there's not too much overlap with your kick. I mean, I have a 6 dB per octave slope here. It's probably engaging like right along here. There's still a lot of subs presence. And the same exact thing as the snare here. I did boost a little bit though of the highs, but then up here I rejected the super highs that were present with these toms. Regarding the drum bus here, if you want to get experimental, I do know this works on my mixes. I recommend experimenting once you start tracking other things, but I will usually apply this before my top-down approach over the whole mix once I have everything tracked. And usually what I do is a little bit more the same, is say, okay, now that I feel the whole thing is cleaned up, I feel like inside the boundaries that I've set, right? So we have right below that 12K, so we have a 9, 10K-ish. We have a bit of a high mid scoop. We have a bit of a low mid scoop and a bit of a low boost, all in the range that we set within our high passes and low passes. So I'm actually just going to play it and then A-B it for you. I mean, I was really careful, but this can just help ensure that now you've gotten a bass line, and on top of your bass line, you're just going to do one nice broad pass through and just enhance the things that maybe you could have been detrimental towards, or it's just fun to experiment with. You can do completely without this, and honestly, I recommend doing completely without this if you want to be safe. Just having fun here. Compressor especially. This, I guarantee you, it comes off. It came free when I re-downloaded Kontakt on this new computer. I tried it out and it sounds sick. Here's before and after. So hopefully you heard the difference there, and I hope you enjoyed my way of doing that, and I hope you heard that it was mildly enhanced, and if at the very least just cleaned up. And I'm going to be doing a full mixing video. I'm actually going to run through my Axe 8 and dial in a tone over this exact drum sound. So next time I'm going to actually write probably a metal song just for the fun of it. I don't really write that too much with my own MIDI, and I'm going to dial my own bass tone starting from levels to EQ to tracking, and then same thing with the guitars, and I hope you're there for it. Thanks.